Warlords of Draenor timeline. So, the new expansion is going to take place partially in Old Outlands, on the planet Draenor before nez'thur blew it up, the guy who became the Lich King, or whose soul is imbued in the Lich King's armor, I should say. Now, I'm a huge fan of time travel sci-fi, and World of Warcraft is no stranger to time travel. While I was reading about the new expansion on the forums, there was a lot of people who were saying how something like this just cannot happen, and how it's ruining WoW lore, and blah blah blah, which I find kinda funny. You should only take things said on the forum with a grain of salt. Those people live to complain about WoW. But this got me thinking about how some people simply do not care for time travel science fiction. Oh, and I might add that the fantasy and science fiction are very similar and used to be classified as the same thing until like 50 years ago, in case you're wondering why I keep saying sci-fi when we're talking about a fantasy MMO. Anyway, I'm going to explain a few ways that something like this has been done very well in other works of sci-fi, and how an expansion like this can happen without actually changing the past, since it is a time travel expansion. First off, from what I know about the limited information I've read, Garrosh goes back in time to try and create his Iron Horde. We find out what he's doing and use the Dark Portal to go back in time to stop him from doing whatever he's doing. The Dark Portal is supposed to like glow red and allow time travel or something. Hasn't really been fully explained yet. This timeline takes place before the orcs drank the demon blood and went crazy, but after kil'jaden corrupted Gul'dan. Now, if WoW uses the alternate timeline theory, this timeline we go to is just a branch off of our current timeline, where everything is exactly the same as our timeline, except that we have crossed over into it. What this means is that the timeline we go to will have a new alternate path, and our timeline will continue on the same path because we didn't go back on our timeline, but a different similar one. We can also look at the multiverse theory, where we simply teleport to another dimension that is identical to ours, but taking place at a different point in time. If you take a look at my drawing, each blue line is identical to the timeline we are on, except each line is taking place at different points in time. The line the arrow points to started after our timeline, so crossing over into it will put us in our past, but they're present. Consequently, 3 of the lines are ahead of our timeline and thus take place in the future. So if we went to one of those timelines, we would be technically going into the future. And that's kind of how the multiverse theory works. In both theories, there is no change to our past, but the futures for our timeline and the timeline we go to will be different from all the other alternate timelines. Same thing with the multiverse theory. Our dimensions and the one we go to will both have different futures from all the other identical ones.